Some motels give you a place to rest. Others never let you leave. Before we dive into this nightmare, make sure to hit that like button if you love creepy stories, subscribe for more terrifying tales, and drop a comment below. Would you dare to stay in this motel? The Vanishing Motel. The rain had started an hour ago, thick and unrelenting, blurring the road ahead as Chris squinted through his windshield. His hands were tight on the wheel, shoulders aching from the long drive. He'd been on the road since morning, heading back from a business trip that had stretched 2 days longer than planned. His phone had lost service miles ago. The gas gauge was dangerously close to empty. He hadn't seen another car in what felt like hours. Then, through the sheets of rain, he saw it. A neon sign flickered in the distance, half buried in the darkness. Pine Hollow Motel. Vacancy. Chris exhaled in relief, slowing down as he pulled into the lot. The building was small, tucked between towering trees that seemed to lean inward, as if trying to swallow it whole. The parking lot was empty except for a single, rusted pickup near the entrance. The windows were dark, save for a faint glow behind the front desk. Chris killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening to the rain hammering his car. Something about this place gnawed at the back of his mind. Maybe it was the isolation, or the way the trees crowded so thickly around the motel that they swallowed the sky. He shook off the unease and grabbed his bag. Just one night. He'd be gone by morning. The motel lobby smelled of damp carpet and old wood. A small desk stood at the center, behind which sat a man. Chris hesitated. Something about the receptionist made his skin crawl. He was tall and thin, almost too thin. His pale skin stretched tightly over sharp cheekbones. His dark uniform looked old-fashioned, buttoned up to the throat. But it was his eyes that were the worst. Black, deep, still. Chris cleared his throat. Yeah, just passing through. One night. The man smiled. It was too wide. His teeth were small, too perfect, like porcelain.
Cash only,
he murmured, sliding a heavy brass key across the desk. Chris hesitated, but handed over a few crumpled bills. The man didn't count them, just tucked them away in an old leather ledger.
Room 6,
he said.
Enjoy your stay.
Chris took the key and turned toward the hallway.
Sleep well.
Something about the way he said it, like a command, like a promise, sent a chill up Chris's spine. The room was worse than he expected. The wallpaper peeled at the edges, curling like old dead skin. The bed was stiff, the sheets yellowed with age. A single lamp cast a dull glow over the space. Chris locked the door and threw his bag onto the chair. Just one night. He'd leave at dawn. He sat on the bed, rubbing his face. His body ached from driving all day. He reached for the bedside clock, one of those old models with flip numbers. 11:47 p.m. Something clicked in the motel. Chris turned his head. It came from the hallway. A low, deliberate click. He held his breath, listening. The rain outside drowned out any distant noise, but something felt wrong. The walls seemed thicker, the air heavier. He shook it off. He was just exhausted. Chris lay back, closing his eyes. The rain was steady, lulling. His breathing slowed. Then, another click. His eyes shot open. The room felt off. The air pressed against him, like a weight sinking into his skin. He sat up. His nightstand, which had been a foot away from the bed, was now touching it. He frowned. That wasn't right. Chris swung his legs over the side of the bed, and his knees hit the wall. His stomach twisted. The room was smaller. Chris stood, heart pounding. His breath came faster. He grabbed the doorknob and twisted, locked. The walls let out a low, groaning sound. He stumbled back, pressing his hands against the shrinking space. The walls were moving. No, this couldn't be real. Then a whisper. It slithered through the vent above him.
Sleep tight.
Chris's breath hitched. The receptionist. He scrambled back onto the bed. His eyes darted to the ceiling. There, a small ventilation grate near the corner. The walls crept inward, slower now, as if savoring it. Chris tore at the vent cover. It wouldn't budge. He grabbed the bedside lamp, smashing it against the metal. The screws loosened. The cover clattered to the floor. The walls groaned again. The bed frame cracked. Chris hauled himself into the vent just as the walls closed in. He didn't look back. The vent was cold, the metal biting into his skin as he crawled. The air was thick with decay. Beneath him, through the grates, he could see the other rooms. Rooms just like his. Some were empty. Others weren't. He saw movement. Hands pressed against walls. Mouths opening in silent screams as rooms shrank, crushing whatever was inside. Chris swallowed his horror and kept moving. Ahead, the vent opened into a narrow maintenance corridor. He dropped down, his knees nearly buckling. He needed to get out, now. The back door led straight into the woods. The second he stepped outside, the cold air hit him like a slap. Then, a deep, wet cracking sound. Chris turned. The receptionist stood in the doorway, only he wasn't a man anymore. His limbs stretched, bones twisting beneath his skin, his mouth unhinged, revealing rows of jagged teeth. His black eyes swirled with something ancient and hungry. Chris ran. The forest was endless, shadows twisting around him. Branches tore at his clothes, his breath ragged. Behind him, the creature moved impossibly fast, its breath rasping through the trees. Chris didn't look back. Then, headlights. His car. He pushed forward, lungs burning. He reached the driver's door, yanked it open, and jammed the keys into the ignition. The creature slammed against the window, claws screeching over the glass. Chris floored the gas. The tires skidded in the mud before catching, and then he was gone. The monster's screech echoing behind him. He didn't stop driving until the motel was far, far behind. The next morning, Chris returned with the police. But when they reached the clearing, the motel was gone. No building, no sign, no driveway, just trees and untouched earth as if it had never existed. Chris stared, heart hammering. One of the officers gave him a doubtful look. "You sure it wasn't just a bad dream?" Chris didn't answer. He just kept staring at the empty space. As they turned to leave, the wind whispered through the trees.
Sleep tight.
Chris never stayed in another motel again. Chris barely escaped with his life. But the question remains, was the motel ever really there? Or was it just waiting for its next guest? If you made it to the end, drop a comment below with "I survived the Vanishing Motel," so I know you're a true horror fan. And don't forget to like the video if it sent chills down your spine. Subscribe for more terrifying tales. Until next time, stay safe out there.